Behind the velvet voice and hip-swiveling performances that made Elvis Presley a global icon, there existed a secret so explosive it nearly destroyed everything he built. In 1957, at the peak of his fame, the king met a woman who refused to bow to his charms, a defiant beauty who would drag him into a spiral of obsession, scandal, and self-destruction. This is the untold story of how one woman's resistance became Elvis's greatest weakness, almost costing him his career, his reputation, and his life. What happened next shocked Hollywood and changed the king forever. It was a humid August night in Memphis, 1957, and Elvis Presley stood at the absolute zenith of American fame. At just 22 years old, he had conquered radio, television, and cinema. His every move was chronicled, his every word quoted, his every glance photographed. Women across America and around the world swooned at the mere mention of his name. He could have anyone he wanted, and everyone knew it. But on that particular evening, at a private party hosted by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis encountered something he had never experienced before. Rejection. Her name was Diana Hartwell, a 24-year-old actress from New York who had just arrived in Hollywood with a 3-picture deal at Paramount. Unlike the starlets and fans who typically surrounded Elvis, Diana carried herself with an air of sophisticated indifference. She had auburn hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, piercing green eyes, and a sharp wit that could cut through the thick, Southern charm Elvis deployed so effortlessly. When Elvis approached her that night, flashing his legendary smile and employing the boyish charisma that had melted a million hearts, Diana simply raised an eyebrow and turned away. She wasn't playing hard to get. She genuinely wasn't interested. To her, Elvis represented everything she had fought against in her career: style over substance, image over artistry, popularity over genuine talent. "I'm not impressed by pompadours and hip shakes," she told him coldly when he persisted. "Come back when you've actually got something to say." For Elvis, who had been worshipped and desired since his teenage years, this dismissal hit like a physical blow. His friends watched in amazement as the king of rock and roll stood speechless, watching this mysterious woman walk away from him without a second glance. That night marked the beginning of an obsession that would consume Elvis for the next 18 months. He couldn't stop thinking about Diana, about her confidence, her dismissiveness, her complete immunity to his fame. For the first time in his adult life, Elvis wanted something he couldn't have. And for a man who had never learned to accept limitations, this desire would become his most dangerous addiction. Within days, Elvis had instructed his entourage to find out everything about Diana Hartwell: where she lived, where she ate, what films she was working on, who her friends were. The hunt had begun, and the king was determined to win his prize, no matter what it cost him. Elvis's pursuit of Diana Hartwell quickly became the talk of Hollywood, though the press remained largely unaware of the drama unfolding behind closed doors. Members of the Memphis Mafia, Elvis's loyal group of friends and bodyguards, watched with growing concern as their friend and employer transformed from a carefree young star into someone they barely recognized. Moody, distracted, and increasingly reckless. He sent Diana flowers every day for 3 weeks, elaborate arrangements that she reportedly gave to her building's doorman without even opening the cards. He had his people arrange coincidental meetings at restaurants, film premieres, and industry parties. Diana attended these events with icy politeness, acknowledging Elvis with a nod before pointedly engaging in conversation with anyone else in the room. The more she rejected him, the more obsessed Elvis became. His friends noticed he was sleeping less, eating poorly, and canceling recording sessions, something the notoriously professional performer had never done before. Colonel Parker was furious, warning Elvis that his behavior was jeopardizing lucrative contracts and endangering his carefully crafted public image. Elvis couldn't stop. He was used to being pursued, not being the pursuer. He was accustomed to gratification, not denial. In Diana, he saw not just a beautiful woman, but a challenge to his very identity. If he couldn't win her over, what did that say about him? About his power, his appeal, his worth? One night in October, after another failed attempt to win Diana's attention at a Hollywood party, Elvis made a decision that would prove catastrophic. He showed up at her apartment at 2 in the morning, drunk and emotional, pounding on her door and declaring, his feelings loud enough to wake the entire building. Diana opened the door just wide enough to look at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You're pathetic," she told him quietly. "You're so used to people worshiping you that you've forgotten how to be a real person. You don't want me. Elvis, you just can't stand that I don't want you." She closed the door, leaving Elvis standing in the hallway, humiliated and alone. But instead of walking away, instead of accepting defeat and moving on with his life, Elvis did something that would set in motion a chain of events that nearly destroyed him. He decided to prove her wrong, whatever it took. By November 1957, Elvis's obsession with Diana had reached a dangerous crescendo. His erratic behavior was beginning to attract media attention, and Colonel Parker was scrambling to control the narrative. The Colonel had built Elvis's image on a carefully maintained balance, sexy enough to excite, wholesome enough to not alienate parents. An obsessive pursuit of an uninterested woman didn't fit that narrative at all. What happened next would become Hollywood legend, though the full truth wouldn't emerge for decades. Elvis, desperate and increasingly unstable, hired a private investigator to follow Diana. He wanted to know everything: who she was seeing, what she was doing, whether there was another man in her life who had succeeded where he had failed. The investigator discovered something explosive. Diana had been secretly married for 3 years to a jazz musician named Raymond Cole, a talented but struggling artist who lived in New York. She had kept the marriage quiet to protect her career in an industry that preferred its starlets single and available. She traveled to New York twice a month to see her husband, maintaining the fiction of being unattached in Hollywood. When Elvis learned this information, something inside him snapped. The rejection suddenly made sense, but instead of providing closure, it only intensified his obsession. She hadn't rejected him because of who he was. She had rejected him because she was already taken. In Elvis's increasingly distorted thinking, this meant there was still hope. If he could somehow remove the obstacle, he could win her heart. What Elvis did next remains one of the darkest chapters in his life. Using his considerable influence and connections, he arranged for Raymond Cole to be offered a prestigious but fabricated opportunity, a 6-month European tour that would launch his international career. The offer was too good to refuse, and Raymond accepted immediately, seeing it as the break he'd been waiting for his entire life. But the tour was a setup. Once Raymond was in Europe, Elvis's people ensured that communication between him and Diana became difficult. Letters went missing. Phone connections failed. The tour itself proved to be a disaster, poorly organized, barely attended, and financially ruinous. Within 3 months, Raymond was stranded in Paris, broke and unable to return home. Meanwhile, Elvis positioned himself as Diana's confidant and supporter during her husband's absence. He toned down his pursuit, approaching her instead as a friend who understood the loneliness of fame. Slowly, carefully, he began to break down her defenses. Diana, worried about her husband and feeling isolated in Hollywood, began to accept Elvis's gestures of friendship. They had coffee together, then dinner, then long drives along the Pacific Coast Highway where Elvis seemed different, vulnerable, thoughtful, almost real. She had no idea that her husband's suffering was orchestrated by the man sitting beside her, smiling that famous smile. By March 1958, Elvis's carefully constructed deception was beginning to unravel, and with it, his entire world. Raymond Cole had finally managed to contact Diana from Paris, and the story he told her didn't match what Elvis's people had claimed about the prestigious tour. Raymond described a nightmare of broken promises, shady promoters, and deliberate sabotage. He suspected someone had set him up, but he had no idea who or why. Diana, intelligent and increasingly suspicious, began connecting dots that painted a disturbing picture. She remembered how Elvis had appeared in her life just as Raymond left. She recalled odd coincidences, the too convenient timing of events. When she confronted Elvis directly, demanding to know if he had any involvement in her husband's disastrous tour, she expected denial. Instead, she got confession. Elvis, exhausted from months of deception and consumed by guilt he had been suppressing, broke down completely. In a tearful admission that shocked even him, he confessed everything: the investigation, the fake tour opportunity, the deliberate isolation of her husband. He claimed it was all done out of love, that he had never meant for things to go so far, that he had lost control of his own actions. Diana's reaction was immediate and devastating. She slapped him hard across the face and told him she would expose him to the press, destroy his career, and make sure everyone knew what kind of monster he really was. Elvis, terrified and desperate, begged her not for his sake, but for the thousands of people whose livelihoods depended on his career. His band members, his employees, his family. What followed was a tense negotiation brokered by Colonel Parker, who had discovered the situation and was determined to contain the damage. Parker arranged for Raymond to be brought home immediately, all expenses paid, along with a substantial financial settlement that would be disguised as compensation for the mismanaged tour. In exchange, Diana and Raymond would sign non-disclosure agreements and never speak publicly about Elvis's actions, but the real cost wasn't measured in dollars. Elvis fell into a deep depression, canceled multiple performances, and began the pattern of prescription drug use that would plague him for the rest of his life. He was drafted into the Army in March 1958, and many close to him believed this was Colonel Parker's way of removing Elvis from Hollywood before he completely self-destructed. Diana Hartwell quietly left Hollywood and returned to New York, her film career abandoned. She and Raymond moved to a small town in Vermont where they lived in relative obscurity. Elvis never contacted her again, but those close to him said he kept a photograph of her hidden in his wallet until the day he died, a reminder of the time. His obsession nearly destroyed everything he had built. The woman who defied the king had ultimately saved him. By refusing to let him destroy her, she forced him to confront the monster he was becoming. Elvis Presley's dangerous obsession with Diana Hartwell remains one of the most closely guarded secrets in rock and roll history. It reveals a darker side of fame, the entitlement, the power, the belief that anything and anyone can be possessed. The king survived, but he was never quite the same. The defiant woman who nearly destroyed him also taught him his most valuable lesson. Some things in life can't be bought, manipulated, or conquered. Sometimes the only power we have is the choice to walk away. What do you think? Could you forgive Elvis for his actions? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and share this untold story with someone who loves music history. Don't forget to follow for more shocking revelations about your favorite icons.